Hey guys, welcome back to the Vegan View. Today we are hanging out with our friend Candice. You definitely know her as the EdgyVeg. She makes some of the best content on YouTube, some of the most epic vegan recipes I've seen, like restaurant quality, but experimental at the same time. She's got a really cool style and she has a really wonderful cookbook, and she is a very passionate vegan on social media. She uses it to spread all kinds of amazing messages, and we're excited to pick her brain and talk to her today. So thank you for being here, Candice.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yay.
Yay.
We're so excited to finally have you on. Like, this is kind of nice because we've never been able to do this before, but now we can do anything on Zoom.
We like text each other all the time and have gone on vacation together, but we've never actually done this.
Right.
Yeah. That was almost a year ago now. It's crazy.
What a different life that was.
I know. Candice, do you want to tell our viewers a little bit about how you came to veganism and about your vegan story?
Yeah, for sure. So I came to veganism. I grew up mostly vegetarian. My mom was very religious, so we didn't eat any pork. She's a Seventh-day Adventist, so by nature, their religion is very much vegetarian based already as it is. But my parents were divorced, so I ate meat kind of with my dad and once in a while with my mom, but we were mostly vegetarian. But when I moved to Toronto, to the big city, and was riding the subway one day, I saw a poster and it had a pig on one side and it was like a cat, I think, or a dog, one of the two on the other. And it said, why love one and eat another? And I was already like mostly there, but then I saw that and was like, oh, well, yeah, can't argue with that logic. And that was pretty much what did it for me. I mean, the first interest in it was more like health-based. I had really bad skin issues and migraines, and a lot of that was triggered by dairy. So that kind of started the cycle. But then after I saw that poster, that was it.
Wow, that's crazy. I used to see those things all the time, and I think I was just like so dense, maybe because I was like grew up eating meat and was in Texas. Like, it took a couple of those things to see for me to be like, oh yeah, that is pretty logical. So it's really impressive that, like, because of your upbringing and everything, your mind was already pretty open to seeing that and being receptive of that.
Yeah, I was around animals a lot. We grew up in the country, and both when I lived in Germany and lived in Canada, I was around a lot of animals. We had like horses, and our neighbors had like sheep and pigs. And so I already had a little bit of that empathy for animals anyway, especially farm animals. So I think that just kind of pushed it over the edge for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, how was the journey for you? Like the transition, was it something that was easy because you had the vegetarian background, or did you find that it was more difficult than you expected?
A little bit of both. I grew up eating a lot of really weird, like faux meat foods. Like my mom, I remember in the 90s having like veggie dogs, and my mom would just experiment with these foods, and she was making like millet burgers and like was making seitan in like the late 90s. So, but she wasn't a very good cook. So I wasn't really drawn to doing those things. I wanted to recreate all of my favorite meals. And I knew that if I was going to do this, like I had to be able to eat my favorite foods. So I just kind of taught myself how to cook. And I think that that made it easier for me because I had kind of this like challenge and something to learn along with the journey, as opposed to just like going to the grocery store and being like, there's nothing for me to eat.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that made it both more difficult and easier in a way. Yeah. It was frustrating going and like eating with other people and going out to eat, but at home I almost had this like creative outlet to work through this new thing that I was incorporating into my life. So a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B.
Did you have like a specialty that you would cook at home do you remember the first thing you nailed that you were like, this is epic?
It was like a not zucchini. It was like an eggplant like pasta recipe, and I was like, I'm not going to be able to make this without cheese. And then I did just simply without cheese, and was like, oh, foods do taste good without cheese. Shocking. So I was making a lot of pastas because I grew up in Europe. So that's what I ate. I ate a lot of pastas, a lot of like carb heavy, a lot of comfort foods. So yeah, once I figured out, okay, just with a couple simple solutions and substitutions, I could make pasta work, then what else can I make work? So yeah, it was definitely this like tomato, eggplant pasta, like gnocchi type situation with some basil. It was pretty good.
Oh, that sounds good. Sounds really good.
I know you're really well known for like your bacon, rice paper bacon, and like all your crazy creations. Like, how do you come up with those? Like, do you seek them out and then try to make them like even better? Do you just come up with them on the fly? Like, I've seen so many of these things go viral, and I know like you're just the queen of all things like funky vegan animal replacements, you know?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So I've been doing this for so long, like teaching myself different cooking techniques. And when I started, I turned a lot to like the raw foodists, the early raw foodists, because they just, while I don't agree with raw food lifestyles, the way that they manipulate foods was really interesting to me. So a lot of those techniques that are very popular now have been around forever. We just didn't know about them because it wasn't popular. So just knowing what I knew from turning to those chefs and those cookbooks and then reimagining them, I'm able to both use really cool ideas out there. Like right now, everyone's talking about carrot bacon, and I was like, must try. So taking something like that and then using what I know on top of it to make it better is definitely one of the ways that I do it. Using traditional recipes and just switching them or using those techniques on, let's say, I don't know, like a daikon or an eggplant or rice paper. Just using what I know in terms of food science, but also how you can manipulate different foods. So it's a little bit of both. I've come up kind of with my own techniques, but then just repurposing techniques that have been around for like 30 years.
I was wondering, because we do something similar. So it was like, for me, I think sometimes the recipe development process, people don't really understand how much goes into it behind the scene. So for you, when you're recipe testing, how many experiments do you think you do that before people ever get to see the recipe?
There used to be a lot more, but I'm pretty good at the way that my brain works. I can like think about and write a recipe. And I would say more like 80% of the time I can nail it on the first try.
Wow.
And then by the second try, I'm like, okay, like sometimes I'll just think of a different ingredient that I could use for something else. Or like the more I do it, obviously the more it evolves. But because I'm doing 2 videos a week plus Instagram content and everything, I can't have a lot of rounds of kind of recipe editing, if you will. But I can conceptualize recipes in my head like on the fly. I just know it works well.
Yeah.
And it's not like a gift. It's just, I've been doing this since 2010.
You have so much experience. Yeah, you're such a pro.
Just kind of throw things together. But I would say usually 2 to 3 is the max. Like mostly 2 is the max that I ever need to do it. And then as I do it in my own life and continue to use, because I cook my own recipes. Like I don't put anything out there that I wouldn't eat.
Yeah.
So these are recipes I use in my life all the time. The more I do them, the more I update them. So every time you go to like the blog, for example, it's updated to the most current version of it.
Yeah, I've totally noticed that with you is like, they're not just, it's just a content machine that you're churning out. Like I see you eat what you make all the time. And I know like, even with me, like getting my sauces and my salads, like everything that I've done, I've continuously updated and like, I'll go back and change the recipe on like all the things. And it may be just like a pinch more of salt or just like fine tuning little things, but I've seen you do the same thing. And I'm like, oh, I respect that. Like, I know how good and how like familiar it is to you, you know. It is really, I feel like it brings a sense of like, oh, I've cooked this for myself, I've cooked this for my family, like this is something I'm offering to all you guys, and it's like a very intimate food experience.
Well, and I tell people all the time, they're like, well, how do I go vegan? Like, what's the easiest way to do it? And the first thing I tell people is like, if you didn't eat kale before going vegan and you didn't like kale before going vegan, you're not going to like it just because you're vegan. So for me, for example, like I'm not going to make anything that I don't like. And if I take a trend that's super popular, I will turn it into something that I do like. Otherwise, like, what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah.
taking it back to when you first went vegan, you said you like kind of taught yourself how to cook because you were forced to. I felt the same way, 100%. I was not a cook. I did not grow up in a household that cooked. We ate out like multiple times a week. And so when I went vegan, it was like, yeah, we were lucky to have a few vegan restaurants around, but other than that, it's like you're kind of forced to learn how to cook. But I know we have a lot of people who watch this show that are new to veganism or new to cooking, and especially now that they're like home, they are forced to cook. Do you have any tips for somebody who's like totally lost? Like how do they like kind of get their footing when it comes to cooking and like being in the kitchen?
Yeah, I would say whenever people ask me this, I kind of just say like, find your favorite recipes. Like, be reasonable. Like, don't go for like a steak recipe because I can't really help you do that. But your favorite pasta recipe, your favorite salad, your favorite, I don't know, casserole, soup, take those recipes that aren't vegan and then just look at the ingredients that are not vegan so that you can easily replace that or plant-based. So if it's milk, replace it with your favorite plant-based milk. If it's butter, replace it with like a vegan margarine like Basil or like Earth Balance or something like that. Making those easy substitutions to recipes you already know that you like is kind of the first step. Just using what's available store-bought wise. Then after you've kind of mastered that, then you can go into like making your own cream from cashews and that sort of thing. But like get the basics down first. Like learn first how to cook using what's available in a store that's a substitute, and then you can start making your own substitutions and experimenting afterwards. But that's, yeah, I find that whenever I tell people that, they're like, oh, that makes sense, because I already like straight up off the bat don't know how to cook, so why am I trying to like make it too complicated? So just take the recipes that you know that are good, master those, substitute, and then like get straight up after that.
Right. I love that.
That's such a good tip because I know even my friends who aren't cooking vegan, a lot of them who are not comfortable cooking, they'll decide they want to cook and then they go from never cooking to making homemade pierogies from scratch, and their kitchen is like they're super overwhelmed, or they'll make Thanksgiving dinner from start to finish by themselves, and it's like, well,
of course you don't like cooking.
Well, and I understand you get excited, but that's how you get overwhelmed and think that cooking is like this really daunting task. So I love that advice about starting with a couple recipes that you already like and just making the swaps there. And I would add to that too, read the recipe all the way through before you get started. People don't read the recipe at all, but they especially don't read it before. And a lot of times that's where you get into trouble in terms of like timing, and then something's burning and you didn't realize something needed to rest. And it's just a lot of unnecessary stress.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because in my cookbook, there's a section that says like how to use this cookbook. And the first thing it says is read the entire recipe through first.
Yes.
Like get to know it before you start doing it. Because if you need something to, rest for 4 hours or do something in the night before, like now you're screwed.
Yeah. And I try to write my recipes too, like super succinct, so that it's not a daunting, like you don't have the longest thing to read, because I know people just want to get started, but it's so important that you read those things. I would love to talk about your cookbook and how you came up with the idea and the recipes for that, and what the process of putting out a cookbook. I mean, that's so impressive.
So I got approached quite a bit to write a cookbook, and I didn't want to.
It's a huge task.
Right?
It's like, it's so overwhelming, like the project.
Yeah, and I have so many chef friends and restaurant owner friends that have written cookbooks, and they were like, it's the worst thing you'll ever do.
Yeah.
So I had this just like negative talk about cookbooks in my head for years. Every time someone brought it up, I was like, nope, never happening. What's the point? I can throw all my stuff online. Like, it'll be for free. Why would people buy a cookbook off of me when they can get all my stuff online? And then Robert Rose, who's my publisher, approached me, and the editor that would have been my editor on the book approached me, and she was actually friends with a bunch of friends of mine. And she just kind of was like, what do you see? I was like, oh, okay. So if let's just say I get to make all the decisions about my cookbook, here's what I want. So I started listing off things like, I want a photo for every single recipe because I'm not going, I have cookbooks. I'm not going to make the recipes without photos. So I started listing up like my dream cookbook and what I would want in order to make that happen, who I would want to work with. And they more or less let me do it. So I was like, okay, fine. The time has come. It's a great marketing tool. It's a great strategy if you want to get on like the morning show circuit. And there's something about a cookbook that gives you clout that having an online presence doesn't. Even still, just having that like tangible thing. There's just something about old school broadcast media that like they look for something like that. So I was like, okay, fine. It's a good marketing move. So then I started writing it, and the concept was I was married at the time, wah wah, and and he had transitioned to veganism, mostly I think just to make me happy. But he was a foodie, and his family was a family of foodies, and so it was all recipes that I had to make him eat food. So that's kind of the concept for the book. It was really important for me to have the voice that I have online in the book, like have it be very present. So all the head notes are written by me, and they're very much in my voice. They're very conversational. It's all like terrible dad jokes, which is my style. That's just who I am. It's very like pop culture reference friendly. Because that's what makes me laugh. So I just wrote the book that I wanted to read. I wrote the book to be all the recipes that I wanted actually to keep cooking in my house and have a tangible book. I kind of went at it from that perspective, and it from concept to print and release was 8 months, which is unheard of.
That's so fast.
Yeah, I'll never do that timeline again. It's like never happened in the cookbook world, and my publisher was like
8 months.
Yeah, 8 months.
I'm shaken. I'm shaken. That's like, you can't even have a baby in that long.
I know.
That's so fast. Damn.
Right? And it was really because I wanted the book to come out for Christmas of that year. So really
smart.
Yeah, so that's why we did that, and I'll never do it again. But it was crazy. But I was like recipe testing like 6 recipes a day. And so I'd never cooked more in my life. I never learned as much as I did than writing that book. I really enjoyed the writing process, like the creative writing process in itself. So yeah, it was fun. And it's all recipes that, like I said before, I make all the time.
What would you say when like encapsulating your cookbook is it about? Is it just like very personal, near and dear recipes? Do they all kind of have like a flavor profile that you kind of tend to go towards, or like a style of food?
So it is a lot of different styles of food.
Yeah.
The cookbook itself is called Carnivore Approved Vegan Recipes.
Yeah,
so,
I love that.
Yeah, so it's all stuff that you just like wouldn't think could be veganized. It's a lot of it's a lot of different styles of cooking. Actually, there's some Indian there, Asian. My ex-husband was Middle Eastern, so there's a lot of Middle Eastern recipes that were like his family's recipes that I veganized. A lot of my family's recipes that were veganized from my European side, and just stuff that inspired me, dishes that inspired me from different restaurants that I love to eat at before I was vegan and then after. So a lot of my favorite vegan restaurants, I tried to like figure out how they did the dish, and that's in the book. And then same with before I went vegan, a lot of those favorite dishes that I constantly went back to, or the one dish that made me fall in love with that restaurant, I just veganized those. So it doesn't really have a theme per se, but it is definitely all recipes that you didn't think could be veganized.
Yeah, it's like a little encapsulation of all things Candace. I love that. I love like the personality that comes from each cookbook.
Like my highlight reel. So there's some like really not difficult, but like more hands-on recipes that take some prep and, you know, marinate for 2 days and that sort of thing. But then there's also a lot of really easy stuff as well. But everything comes kind of with like a little story or a joke or some terrible movie reference that I've punned its way to veganism.
But that's what like makes it fun to read, because like I like to read cookbooks. I know Nicole likes to read cookbooks. Like I like to read them, and like having those little excerpts and the pictures on every recipe. One of my favorite cookbooks is V Street, and just like incredible recipes, but not half of them don't have pictures. And I'm just like, I don't know what it's supposed to look like when it's done. It's so,
every single prop that you see in that book, like hand-picked it. I worked with a girlfriend of mine who's a prop stylist, but it wasn't like, here's the recipe and go style it. Like, we were in the prop house together for like 6 hours every Monday picking props for like the 50 recipes that we were doing that week. Like, everything was done. Would I do it this way in the future? Probably not. You gotta let go of some control.
I love that.
Wolf itself was like, I will pick every prop, I will style every photo. Yeah, but so I appreciate that. Whenever people are like, the photos, I'm like, oh, thank God.
No, but that really is, I think, what makes people excited to try the recipe, because especially if you're sort of on the fence about making it, sometimes a great photo is like, no, I want to eat that, and that's the thing you need.
Yeah, I straight up won't make a recipe if it doesn't have a photo.
Me too. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite recipe from the book?
Ooh, that's so hard. I get asked this, and I feel like every time I answer it, the answer changes.
Yeah.
My favorite recipe, the butter chicken is pretty bomb. If you're looking for something to make now that you can like make in your Instant Pot that'll last like days and days, and you can freeze it. I'm just thinking of like our current time. The butter chicken.
That sounds so good.
Stuff I can make in bulk and then have for a few days, because like right now it's so overwhelming having to cook breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's like too much. And I mean, you guys are all used to being in the kitchen a lot, but like for somebody who usually like eats out a lot, it's insane.
Oh, another good one for that is it's like a Thai basil beef. I forget what I think it might just be called Thai basil beef. That might be one of the few recipes in the book that doesn't have a weird name. But it's like it's my version of like a pad kar prao, and you can make a ton of that and like
love that dish.
or like the next day like make it into like more fried rice with it's one of my favorite recipes too.
Nice.
That used to be my go-to for Thai food.
Same.
That Thai basil and that's like sauce. It couldn't.
The spicy chili sauce. Like now I want to eat that for dinner.
I know. I was like, now I want to make that. That sounds so good. I would love to talk about how you went from you saw the pig and the cat poster, the pig and the dog poster, and that inspired you to learn how to make delicious vegan food. And then how did it go from that to sharing it online and using cooking as a form of spreading the vegan message?
Yeah, it was totally by accident. My family was like, cool, you're cooking. I would like send photos to my mom. She's very needy, so it's just a way for me to like send her. I would just email her things. She would write me like paragraphs of like here's some food I made. So keep in touch with her, and she started asking for the recipes, and she cooks a lot, but she's more like no salt, no oil, no like just very boring, healthy cooking. So we would send recipes back and forth, and then I'd have other friends that asked for recipes, and people would just kind of see it. So I was like, okay, I'm tired of like cutting and pasting and like sending it to like 5 people every day. So I started a blog.
I had one of those.
Yeah. And I put it up there, and just people started just reading it out of nowhere. And I was like, oh, interesting. It was a lot more aggressive back then. Like it was very like in your face, militant, scary vegan talk, but people were reading it, and I was like, oh, okay. And then I was sharing them, and just like, if you felt like cooking something, here you go. If you felt like reading some nonsense I wrote, here you go. And what was the change to YouTube? It was this weird production company, and they were mostly broadcast, and they wanted to put like a women's lifestyle show together, and so they needed segments. And my hairstylist's boyfriend was doing like a lot of the like casting, and she was like, I have this girl that like does vegan recipes in her underwear and swears a lot, like, do you want to talk to her? And so they made this like YouTube channel of my food, and I learned a bunch of stuff from them, and then I just did it on my own, and people were into it. So here we are.
So what kind of work were you doing before you started the blog?
So I went to school for advertising and marketing, copywriting, that sort of thing. So all very tangible skills that I could just parlay into what I'm doing now.
Totally.
I did that for a while, but I also was really into like wellness and yoga and working out and food in general. So I got kind of bored, and I started working at like a juice bar. It was like a raw food cleansing place and juice bar, just to like, I needed to talk to people, not work in a cubicle. So I did that for a while. I ran a restaurant. The owner was not, it made me in charge of everything, which was a nightmare at the time, but taught me everything I needed to know about running a business. So I quit that because she threw something at me, and started working at an agency.
I thought you meant figuratively, so it took me a second.
Oh no, like she had like angry, like any chefs are like like crazy people a lot of the time. A lot of anger, and just like want things done. So anyway, I went back and worked at an agency for a while, and then was doing both the EdgyVeg and the agency work. And then one day I was like, I've been up for 4 days. I need to just like pick the EdgyVeg and try to do it full time as a job, or like stop doing it and keep working at this agency. So I just kind of like quit and tried to make it happen. So it was a lot of skills that I could transfer very easily to what I'm doing now.
Yeah. Did you ever feel like self-conscious about the messaging that you're putting out there in terms of veganism? You said at first you were militant and really passionate about the way that you were wording the message. Did you ever feel pressure to change that or soften it, or to go harder?
I actually kind of softened it and changed it for me. I found that a lot of the language I was using, a lot of the stuff I was exposing myself to, was just making me really angry and depressed. Like having to watch those like animal videos all the time and talking about it all the time, just as a person, just gave me a really angry demeanor and was really bad for my mental health, my depression, my anxiety, because I couldn't escape it. I was constantly thinking about it, which like I am now, but like to a much more manageable degree. And I was like, I'm like a pretty funny person sometimes, I think. Like, why do I have to approach it from this like angry way? There's other people that can do that and not feel the way that I'm feeling. So why don't I do something that's more natural to me and kind of approach this from like a humor perspective, a making fun of myself perspective, a like satire and sarcasm perspective. And so I did it more for me than for anyone else, which is kind of how I feel that you should be online.
Yeah.
Like be you for you, and don't like be what other people want you to be. Little PSA there. But yeah, that's why I ended up changing it, just because I wasn't happy.
Yeah,
Like,
I think a couple of years ago, like when we all met, it was really socially acceptable to be kind of an angry, rude vegan. And like, I remember being super angry and super like up in arms about everything. And I was just like, it was horrible for my mental health. It feels horrible. Like, why do you want to be such a dick to people like all the time? Just like there's so many other ways of like conveying your message and using something that's comfortable to you. Like for you're so funny, and like everything you post is so impassioned but hilarious at the same time, and you like have your own voice, and that is so important. It's so much more relatable than being like this certain kind of vegan that everyone's expecting.
A lot of people away. I was pushing them away. I was getting their guard up and their defenses up. So then you can't have a conversation with someone when they're defensive and trying to just like not even just like validate what they're doing, and I feel like people just stop listening at that point. So I was like, I'll just feed you. Here's a fork, eat my food.
Yeah. I said that in an interview the other day. I was like, I think sometimes the best way to convince someone to try veganism or to open someone up to veganism is to just feed them delicious food, make them your favorite foods, because then they start to see that it's not that weird and they don't have to be defensive. And it's just like everybody loves tasty food. So I think it's a really great bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like when you approach it, I feel like we've all kind of been in that place where we felt super angry, and that's how we were approaching things. And when you're approaching it that way, you have like subconsciously maybe this expectation that you can control how people feel and that you have the power to like change their mind and change their feelings on something. And I think it's just about accepting the fact that you cannot control people. You can only control yourself, and you will live such a happier life if you are like treating people with kindness and then also receiving that as a result, than if you're approaching things in a super angry manner and you go about just being pissed off that the rest of the world doesn't see things the way that you do, because you just can't change other people.
And no one wants to be around an angry person.
But that's something I love so much about your content is you share really delicious food, but then you also sometimes you share messages that you're passionate about in a funny way. Sometimes you share just information, which I think is something that you don't see as often on social media. It's a lot of opinion. So I like that you share information. And then sometimes you share personal experiences as well. And you've experienced a lot of you get a lot of negativity on social media, and you are so open about sharing it and why this is unacceptable or why this thought process is so dangerous. And first of all, I think that's very brave, but just as on a personal level, how do you handle it?
I didn't used to handle it well. I went through like a lot of even like physical changes that I would make to myself just like based on what people were saying to me. I would take it very personally when people had any opinion about what I was saying. And people are so quick to attack, like not even like you as a person, but like your looks. And it took years for me to like develop that really thick skin that I have now, where I just am like, oh, what a sad person to like attack someone over their weight or the way that they look or their hair color or beauty marks that they have on their face, because they can't actually make a valid point about what you're saying to argue. So I've been told in the past that like sharing the things that people say to me is kind of like, and like calling them out is immature and that I should be above that. And it's not even about like, look what this person's saying to me. It's more about creating awareness of what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior. And especially as women, like what is an acceptable way to talk to women and what is an unacceptable way to talk to women. And while some people kind of get turned off by me sharing these horrible comments that I get, other people, especially men, for example, will send me a message saying like, I had no idea that people talk to women this way, or I had no idea that women felt this way. And now I know not to do that to another person. Or I have been telling women to smile my entire life, and I had no idea that it makes women feel uncomfortable. Like now I will stop doing that. So that, especially from like a female online perspective, I think that we are very vulnerable as people. We just, as a woman, there's something about being a woman that just opens you up to so much more attack than anybody else online. So like you're putting yourself out there, you're putting yourself at risk of listening to these things that maybe some people would say to your face, and most of the time things that people wouldn't say to your face. And then you add vegan on top of that. And you just have to realize that, you know, everyone's going through their own thing. And if they're directing hate at you, like there's so many other factors that could be happening in their own life. And you just happen to be the person in front of them that they're choosing to throw all that at. And it took me a while to get there, but now that's kind of how I think of it. And I try to share the negativity that I get as like a teaching moment, as opposed to like, look at this a-hole, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just like, wow.
Sometimes I don't have that restraint because of, again, something else is happening in my life. But most of the time I try to take it as a teachable moment. Like these are not acceptable things to say to anyone.
Right.
Or, you know, here's why I choose to live the lifestyle that I lead. And here's some information about that. And sometimes people will be like, oh, okay, great. I didn't think about that perspective. And other times they're like, F you, go away. And that's okay.
No, you sharing those things, like a couple years ago, I got so much hate when I started out YouTube, like, and I was just doing it for fun, and it made it so unapproachable and scary. And I very much felt like, well, especially like I get racist comments, people like you, especially women like you, sharing those kinds of things. It makes me realize, oh, that is like not okay. And other people are dealing with it and fighting with it. And like, even when you're just sharing, like, look at this asshole, it impacts me greatly. And I feel like I have a protector out there too. So I really appreciate when you do that.
And I love that, because that's exactly why I do it. I feel like it also tells women specifically, but any person that gets attacked online, that like, you don't have to put up with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, because someone has the means to say those things to you doesn't mean that you deserve it, and it doesn't mean that you have to take it. So I'm glad, because that's why I share that right there.
Yeah, I think it inspires people. Like, I feel like it inspires women to have a voice, and when they see that, then they feel like, oh, I can stick up for myself in that situation where they may not normally feel that way. Like, I just remember growing up, like, I was always told to smile by men, always, just always. And I thought that was like normal. I thought maybe I had a resting bitch face or something, and I needed to work on that. And it wasn't until somebody, or I saw something, or somebody told me that you don't have to smile when men tell you to smile, that I was like, oh, that's fucking right, I don't.
Yeah. Yep. And that's
so I think it's important to talk about it. Like, we have to keep talking about it. We all have to.
Yeah. I think it's such a dangerous message to send, because it sounds so innocent, like, oh, smile, because, oh, I want to know that you're happy or that you're doing okay. It seems like it's coming from such a good place, but really what it says is that if you're not in a pleasant mood, or that first of all, you're only valuable if you're like chipper and upbeat, and if you're pleasant to be around. For us, it makes me more comfortable if you're smiling. I think that's the subtext, and I think that's why it makes you so uncomfortable, is you feel like you can't just exist as you are. You have to be pleasant, and you have to be positive and up, otherwise it's not good enough. And that's a really, really dangerous message to send, I think.
Yeah, women are human beings. They're not just like these pretty smiley things to look at.
Yeah,
and I feel like it's in the same vein as women almost feeling like they have to accept compliments. It just kind of opens, it gives men, women, whoever is choosing to catcall you or throw compliments at you, it kind of almost gives them like an in to talk to you. And what a lot of these people don't realize is how uncomfortable we feel. So all of a sudden we're put in this state of being uncomfortable, and not to be hyperbolic, but like fearing for your safety. Like, as a woman, you're already afraid like 80% of the time. Yeah. And I think it's the same with, telling women to smile. It's almost like it's this weird in that it gives them to talk to you. Because if they were just to be like, hey, what's up? Like, you might not be as responsive, or you might not be as taken back as like, oh, what do you mean I should smile? Like, what's wrong with my face? Like, it almost makes you vulnerable.
It's a power dynamic. Yeah,
the power dynamic. All of that was what I meant.
No, it's I never thought of it that way. That's such a good point.
I'm always surprised by how many people are upset at the content that you put out when it does have to do with feminism, because I see veganism and feminism being very aligned. And I think that veganism is essentially feminism. Like, we're fighting for these animals' rights. We're fighting for female animals' rights a lot of times as well. And so it's always so interesting to me, like, you probably have a very vegan heavy audience, and those are probably some of the same people that are upset by your feminist posts. It's just so shocking to me.
Very disconnected. And my favorite thing is when people are like, stick to veganism, like, your channel has become so man-hating. I'm like, I don't hate men. I love men. Yeah. I hate inequality. Like, if I point out a man, like, I point out men and women when they say shitty things to me. And I think that that's where people right away, again, it's the defensiveness. And I think that feminism and veganism, the minute you talk about those topics, the same type of like red, like alarms and like red flags go up for people in terms of like feeling like they have to defend themselves, because all of a sudden you're kind of threatening the way that they see the world and the way that they see everything around them. And the minute that that's a little bit compromised, you know, we start to get into that like fight or flight mode, I think, as people. And you can say that with any kind of topic when someone brings it up to you, if you're like acting shittily. But I think that that's why I get so many comments, whether it's hate comments or feminist comments or veganism. It's just because they're very similar, like you're saying, like it kind of brings up the same thing for both.
Yeah.
Not a genre, both.
It's like, it's all these social justice movements should be intersectional. Like we shouldn't be denying rights of anyone for the furtherment of any other type of rights. That's what social justice is about. It's about reaching equality. And I am always shocked with how much ignorance there is within the vegan movement. I think people tend to be like, I'm vegan, I'm doing great, I'm the best, we're done, untouchable. And it's just not true. Like, really, we all grow up in this patriarchal society, and like we've all been exposed to racism and all kinds of things. So like, of course we're all not perfect and we're learning. That's it. We're just learning. No one's getting attacked.
Exactly. And I mean, holding something against someone that they did a while ago, like, is something that needs to stop happening everywhere on the internet, but like especially in the vegan community. I think that a lot of vegans will forget, like, you were not always vegan. Yeah. Like, have some compassion for former you and have some respect for that journey that brought you here, and give that to someone else. Like, give them that benefit of the doubt. And I think that we can forget that.
Yeah. So you said that there was a Subway poster that had the pig and the either cat or dog, and it said, "Why eat one and love the other?" Is there another sort of like vegan message that you think is just super, super powerful?
Yeah, I mean, the environment's a big one for me. Like, I really care about the environment, and that whole rhetoric around, you know, the best thing that you can do for the environment is live a plant-based lifestyle. And just, you know, the concept that it's so much bigger than you, and community and ecosystems, like not just ecosystems like naturally, but ecosystems of everything that you do in your life. And veganism, I think that if you can show that passion and compassion to another person, whether they decide to that night, you know, eat a plant-based meal just because they had a conversation with you, or, you know, 2 weeks later be like, oh, so-and-so talked about oat milk, so I'm going to try that instead of buying dairy milk. You have to understand that those things resonate with people and that passion is infectious. So if you have like a really beautiful, uplifting passion for veganism, I think that's kind of what gets people thinking. And that's really important to me with passion, right? Like, I don't care what the topic is. If you're passionate about like model trains, and you speak passionately and throw jokes in there and like you show me how it works, like I'm gonna be excited about that.
Yeah, I'm always like, the best part of watching YouTube is watching someone's fire come alive in their soul, and like that looks different for everyone, and that is what makes YouTube like interesting. I don't want to hear like the same thing I heard like Earthling Ed talk about with like someone else talking about it. Tell me in your own words and like let that fire ignite, you know?
I love that. You can follow Candice for epic vegan recipes, a lot of feminism and just badass female messaging, and ghost stories. So what else do you need? We'll put her information in the description box because you should be following her if you're not already.
All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in this week. Give this video a thumbs up and let us know, have you ever made an EdgyVeg recipe? Which ones are your favorite? We would love to know. Definitely check out Candice on all her social media. We'll be linking that down below. Check out our individual channels, our Facebook page, and make sure you subscribe to this one because obviously very lit. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.
Bye.